Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar for Tips for Intermediate Report Studio Authors. I am Erin Dunmeyer, and I'm the Business Intelligence Practice Director here at John Daniel Associates. John Daniel has been implementing business intelligence solutions for 20 years, providing strategy, vision, and execution of custom solutions in areas of data warehousing, business analytics, and customized applications. John Daniel is based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but has serviced clients nationally. Our first topic we will be covering is how one report specification can serve as multiple reports. Within one report spec, you can define multiple pages using the same or different queries and set the appropriate pages to display with variables. We will be working with the sample report you see here on the slide. The same report can produce a summary version with revenue by retailer and a detail version with product information. Render variable is a property that is on multiple objects in Report Studio. A variable defined within the Condition Explorer can be used for the render variable property to determine whether the object renders or not. We will be using this property on the report pages to determine which page renders when the report is executed. So let's hop into Report Studio. A report has already been created that has multiple pages. So this is a typical report, very simple. There's a summary level detail list, and then there's a more detailed level list. This report has 2 pages, revenue by retailer, this is the summary level, and revenue by product, this is the detail level. The report also has a prompt page. Let's take a look at each of these pages. This is the summary. This is the detail. And these are both sourced from the same query. So if we look at the queries, there's one query that feeds each of these lists. They're on 2 separate pages, 2 separate layouts. Some similar information on both of those pages, which is why we're using one query. And then we have a couple of different queries for the prompt values. You don't always have to use the same query. You can use different queries for the same kind of example, but in this example, one query made sense. So I'm going to run the report and show you the 2 different pages. Here's our prompt page. We have one required prompt to select the year, and then we have some optional prompts, product line, retailer type, and retailer. I'm sure those of you familiar with Cognos, you're going to recognize this data. This is the Cognos sample data. So these are the samples that come with your Cognos installation. I'm going to run this for 2010. Here we have the summary page of the report, and we can see the detail that was on the summary page. And if we go the whole way to the bottom, we're going to see the detail page. So right now when we run the report, both pages render. That's not what we want to happen. We only want the summary page to render when we run the report. So we need to create a prompt so that we can pass a parameter on which page renders. I'm going to copy this table and prompt and modify it. This is just a simple value prompt. Our value prompt is going to have static choices. We do not need to reference a query. And we're going to keep this real simple, and our static choices are going to be summary for the summary page and detail for the detail page. And because we copied this, we have to change the parameter, so we're using a unique one. So now, if we run the report, on the prompt page, we are going to have two options, summary and detail. We're going to have our new prompt that we created, but it's not going to do anything. These are static choices. There is no filter anywhere that is referring to this parameter. There is nothing where this parameter exists. So at this point, we can select whatever we want. This prompt will not do anything. We want to create a variable so that we can use it as the render variable for the pages. We're going to create a string variable so that it can have multiple values. And the definition of our string variable is going to be the value being returned from our prompt. So the parameter value from the prompt, the name of the variable is somewhat irrelevant. It really doesn't matter what you name it, but it is useful in Report Studio to provide meaningful names to objects so that when you're referencing them, you know what you're looking at. We are going to give this variable two values, summary and detail, the same two values that we defined as the static choices in the prompt. So going back to the Page Explorer, we're going to navigate to the report pages. Here we have our summary page and our detail page. On the summary page, we're going to set the render variable to our new variable we just defined, detail level, and we want it to render when summary is selected at the prompt. This is our detail page. We're going to use the same variable, but we want this page to render when detail is selected at the prompt. So let's run our report again. Now, this prompt is connected to objects within the report, and it will do something, as opposed to last time when it wasn't connected to anything. So now, we've chosen summary. We get the summary report back. This has many pages, but if we go the whole way to the bottom, we can see that we're still looking at the summary report. Let's run the report again and select detail. We select detail at the prompt. Now we're getting the detail report with detailed information like product type, product, and product number. However, when we want users to run this report, we only want them to be able to run the summary. We don't even want to give them a choice. And then we want them to be able to drill through to the detail. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a drill through definition. We are going to drill through to the same report that we're in. We are within the product line revenue report. We are selecting as our drill through definition the product line revenue report. These are the parameters defined within the report. You can see here that our detail level parameter is not showing up. That's because what is running and rendering in front of us when we set up a drill through definition is the last saved version of the report. And that detail level parameter did not exist the last time the report was saved. So I'm going to save the report and go back into the drill through definition. And we should now see our detail level parameter. It is right here. We want to pass our product line. We want to pass the data item value of the retailer and the retailer type. and we have to pass the parameter for the year. Now, for our detail level, what we want to pass is the word detail, so that when the report executes the drill through, the detail level prompt is answered with the word detail so that the detail page renders and not the summary page. The way that we do this is we go into our query and we create a data item that has the string detail. Again, meaningful names are important just so you know what you're looking at, but the name could be anything. The important part here is the expression definition. We want this to be detail to match the static value in our prompt and our variable so that the correct page renders. So back to our summary page, back to our drill through definition. We want to pass the data item value of the item we just created. And again, it's just a string that says detail. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to save the report, and we're going to run it. We're going to run the summary version of the report. We can now see that a drill-through link has been set up on Retailer. That's where we've set it. And if we click on one, it executes the same report, but what renders is the detail page. We no longer see the summary page first. That's great. That is exactly how we want it to behave. But like I said, when users run the report from Cognos Connection, we don't want them to have access to the detail off the bat. We want them to only have access to summary and have to drill through to the detail. So we need to hide the prompt so that their only choice is summary. In fact, they won't get a choice. So let's navigate to our prompt page. First, before we hide the prompt, we need to set the default value of the prompt to summary. So now, when we generate the prompt page, summary is automatically selected instead of nothing. And now we're going to create a variable that we can use to hide the prompt. We're using a Boolean variable this time, and I'm naming it show prompt. I'm going to hop back to PowerPoint for 1 second to go over this slide, setting a parameter without displaying it. You must set the default parameter, which we just did. We set it to summary so that a value is passed to the report from that parameter that you're hiding. You cannot use the render variable when you hide the prompt. We'll go over that, and I'll show you what happens if you do use the render variable. You can use the style variable. So there's 2 steps to this. We've just created the step on the left that you see in the picture, the Condition Explorer variable properties. We went to the Condition Explorer. That's in the center of Report Studio, beneath the Page Explorer and the Query Explorer. We went to the Condition Explorer. We created a new Boolean variable. We set it to 0. A Boolean variable, there are 2 conditions, 0 and 1. 0 equals false, 1 equals true. We don't want the prompt to show, so our expression is 0. So show prompt, false, and the way that we're setting the variable, it will return a false value and not show the prompt. On the right, this is the second step that we need to execute. We need to set the style variable to what we've just created and then set the box type. So let's hop back to Report Studio. We've created our variable. It is set to false. And on our prompt page, you can set a style and a render variable directly on a value prompt. However, because of the way that this prompt page is designed, I'm going to set them here at this table level so that the entire table is hidden and not just the prompt. First, I'm going to show you why we can't use a render variable. So remember, this is set to 0. 0 means false. So when this report executes, we have this table and thus the prompt inside of it set to render equals false. So when we run it, we're not going to see it. But the problem with a render variable is the prompt never renders. So it doesn't matter what you have the default selection set to, it never gets passed to the report because the prompt never renders in the first place. So the best way around this is to not use the render variable. We need the prompt to render. I'm going to remove that variable from the render variable, and I'm going to set it as the style variable. So we're going to allow the prompt to render. Now, with styling, we need to hide it from displaying. And when you set a style variable, to set the style on that object, you have to navigate to the Condition Explorer and select a value of the variable that you want to set. So when show prompt equals no, and when you have a variable selected or a value selected for a variable, your Explorer bar will turn green to indicate that you have a value selected. We have the table selected. We can see that in the Properties pane. Our style variable is show prompt. If we hover over the Condition Explorer, we can see that we have no selected. So when show prompt equals no, whatever we set this table to, that's what's going to happen. We want to set the box type to none. That means it's just not going to display. Now, if we say show prompt yes, that's going to show up again because we've only set what happens when show prompt equals no. If we set this to no variable, it's still going to be there because it is a part of the layout of the prompt page. If we select show prompt no, it hides because it shows you what you've set up. Okay, so I'm going to turn the variable off and I'm going to run the report. You can see that nothing is displaying here. Our value prompt for the level of detail does not display. And I'm just going to hit finish. But this time, the prompt is rendered. The prompt is there, even though it's not displaying. Our default selection is summary. So the summary page of the report displays. I'm going to go the whole way to the bottom of the report. And as you can see, we're still on the summary view of the report. That's because our prompt and our render variables are working properly, and the detail page is not displaying. And from here, if we click on any one of these, let's go to Stock Express, it's going to drill through to our product level detail and only display the product page, the detail page. Now, when we drill through to this detail level, you can see that we no longer have the reference of what product line, what retailer type, or what retailer we're looking at. They're not part of the list. Product line, retailer type, retailer, even the year is not displayed here. So we don't have any reference as to what those are here. But we want to. So let's go back to our report and put that in there. We are going to use a layout component reference to show that. I'm going to hop back to PowerPoint for a moment. A layout component reference is basically a shortcut. It is an object that you can put on a page within Report Studio that is a shortcut that points to another object. And the biggest benefit of this is you can define logic in one place, in one container, in one list, in one table, in one block, or you know, define format, layout, however you want to reuse things, and then refer to it multiple times on different pages. And a wonderful thing of layout component reference is, say that you have a standard header layout for reports throughout the company, it can be defined in one report spec and referenced in every other report spec. As you can see on the right side here of this image, when we refer to a component reference, you can refer to something in the same report or in another report. So it's just a great way to reuse content that you've already created. So let's hop back to Report Studio. If we look at the summary page, we have a table here that has 4 separate blocks in it. The first one, this is a required prompt on the prompt page, the year, so it always displays. These other 3, these are optional prompts, so they're only going to display if something is selected at them. But I don't want to define this logic in every header on every page in this report. So I can reuse this table on the second page. Now, one thing of note when you use a layout component reference is you can only refer to items that have been given names. So, in our first look here, we're going to see that the only things we see are the list on the first page and the list on the second page. This is our summary list. This is our detail list. I don't see that table that has the subtitles. So let's go back to our summary page, select the table, and scroll down to the name property. There's no name here, so it is not showing up for us to select. We have to give it a proper name. We're going to call it Report Subtitles. And now, back here on the detail page, I am now seeing the Report Subtitles table within this report. It's showing up now that I've given it a name, and I selected it, I clicked OK. If I click anywhere in here, if I look over at the properties, it shows me that what I have selected, it's not a table, it's not a block, it's not a text item, it is a layout component reference. And it tells me the name of it. And if I click the ellipsis, it'll tell me that it's from this report, you know, this is where it's from. I cannot change anything about this table here. It is a shortcut. So if I wanted to change anything about the layout component reference, I'd have to come here and change the table, and it would automatically update wherever it's referenced. So let's run the report again. Go the whole way to the bottom and click on Stock Express again. And as you can see, it helps if you save the report. So the important thing to remember about drill through, and this is something that is overlooked time and time again by developers and has provided many a drill through headache. When you drill through on a drill through link, it re-executes the report. So it doesn't matter what changes you've made within Report Studio, if you have not saved the report, when you drill through and the report gets re-executed, those changes are not going to show up. So I'm going to click on Stock Express again now that we've saved the report, and here is our layout component reference. It is being carried through from the summary page, and please note that on the summary page, we only have year 2010. We did not select anything at the optional prompts, so they're not displaying as subtitles. However, when we clicked on Stock Express, because we are passing data item values to those prompts, we're passing product line, retailer type, and retailer in our drill-through definition. When this report is re-executed and renders, each of those has a value and is displayed here. Okay, so the next topic that we're going to talk about is bursting. We're going to set up a very simple burst example. There are two main components you need to burst. You need a burst item and a burst recipient. So our burst recipient can either be anonymous if you're going to burst to a file drive, or it needs to be a data item containing an email address so that it can be delivered via email to a recipient. Today, in our example, we're just going to be using anonymous and sending the bursted report output to a file drive, a file share within the system. The burst item is the item on which you want to separate report content. So for the benefit of anyone that does not know what bursting is, you can select any item that is within your data set and separate the report content by that data item. So for example, let's hop back to, and the burst options are on the File menu in Report Studio. We'll see that when we set them up. I'm going to close our output here, just clean up some windows. So I'm going to run the summary again real quick. So it is common that bursting to be done by an item that is displayed in a report, but it is also possible and not completely uncommon to burst by an item that's not in the report. So for example, for what we're looking at, we can burst this report apart by retailer type. Say that we want, well, hang on a second. We don't want to page down to everything. Okay, let me run this again so we can see the different retailer types. So when I run this from the summary level, and I don't select any optional prompts, I just run it, every retailer type is being returned in my result set. We have department store, we have direct marketing, equipment rental store, etc. Say I want the report to be broken up into segments by the retailer type. I want one report for all retailer type department store, one for direct marketing, etc. That is completely possible, and that's the example that we're going to set up. But it is also possible to burst on an item that is not being displayed. So say I have a manager in my data set that is associated with each of these retailers. I could burst the report by manager so that each manager gets the retailers that they're responsible for. Okay, so our example, we need an item and our item is going to be retailer type. We're going to be breaking the report up into segments by retailer type, and then we need a burst recipient. So we're going to call this burst recipient. Now, we want to just burst the report apart and save it to a file, a shared drive. We're not going to email this out to different people in this example. So we need to use the Cognos anonymous user. And if you don't have access to Cognos administration, just Google burst anonymous user and you'll be able to find the CAM ID here for the anonymous user. Trying to highlight it, having a hard time. Okay. So this is the CAM ID that we want to use for the burst recipient if it's not going to specific email addresses. And again, if you don't have access to Cognos administration, you can Google it. There's a lot of articles out there about it. If you do have access to Cognos administration, within the Cognos namespace, the properties of the anonymous user, view the search path ID and URL. It's the search path that we want to use. I'm going to go back to Report Studio and I'm going to copy this into my expression definition. Now, this needs to be a string, so I need to put this in single quotes. So that's the one gotcha that you have to remember when you copy this in here. If you try to burst this without the single quotes, you're going to get an error that it is not working properly. Okay, so we have our burst recipient set up. Now from our File menu, I'm going to click on Burst Options, and by default, Burst Options, nothing is set up. We have to check this box to make the report available for bursting, and we have everything within one query. We want to label each group by the retailer type, and the retailer type is also our group. And again, we have everything in the same query. If you have your burst groups and your burst recipients in separate queries, you can set up a master detail relationship between the two queries so that the data scopes from one query to another. I'm going to click OK, click Save again. Now you cannot burst a report from within Report Studio. You have to go back to Cognos Connection. Here's our report we have just saved. I'm going to run with options. I've selected Excel 2007 as the format. We want to save the report because we're going to save it to the file system. Now to get to the option to be able to burst the report, we have to click on Advanced Options here. As you can see, once we're in Advanced Options, we can select multiple formats. We can select multiple delivery methods. we are going to save to the file system, and this retailer's directory within the file system is already defined. Setting up a shared file system within Cognos is something that has to be done by an administrator. There are properties within Cognos configuration and within Cognos administration that need set up. So if you don't have a file system option, talk to your administrator. And then the only other thing I need to do is check this burst the report box. Now I'm going to click Run. I still like 2010, so I'm just going to hit Finish. And I have a window open over here that is, I am mapped to the Cognos server and the shared directory where the Cognos share is set up, and there's this retailer's directory. As you can see, our reports are already finished. The label, so let's go back to Report Studio for a minute. On File, Burst Options, the label we set here is retailer type. That retailer type label is what is put into the name of the burst report. So it always uses the report name and then the language that Cognos, that your installation is set up in, and then it'll add whatever label you've defined. And then the actual reports are broken apart by that same data item because that's what we've selected as our groups here, retailer type. So if we open one of these up, you can see that we have each product line: camping equipment, golf equipment, outdoor protection. But if we look at retailer type, all we're seeing here is department store. That is because this particular report is filtered on and only contains department store because we burst by that retailer type. And then each of the other ones will be just like that. Here's eyewear store. We'll have each of the product lines that eyewear store is within, and eyewear is only within personal accessories. And we got output for each of the retailer types. Bursting is commonly used to distribute, to create all of these reports and distribute them so that, say you have a company with 25 project managers, instead of setting up report views or manually running reports every time you need them, 25 times selecting a different manager at a prompt, or setting up report views, 25 different report views, and having to modify them every time a project manager changes or a new one is hired. If you burst on the data item project manager, report output will be created for each project manager, and it is dynamic. Every time somebody's hired, every time somebody is demoted from being a project manager, that list will just update automatically based on the data in the system. So it is a huge time savings when you're creating a large amount of report output like that. Okay, well, let's hop back to PowerPoint. So I am done with the demo. We're going to turn it over to questions. I'm going to see if anybody has asked any questions. Again, my name is Erin. You can email any questions that you have to cognos@johndaniel.com. After this, if you have any questions right now, please type them in the chat or the Q&A session within the WebEx. If you have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to email me at this address. So let's go check for questions. Okay, so somebody has asked if we will be distributing a link for the recording. Yes, we can distribute a link for the recording. Now, I know that I did gloss over, some of the fine details in some of these topics. We were trying to get a lot in the short amount of time we have here together. But if anybody has any questions about how anything was done, you can certainly email me that too, and I'd be happy to help. We do have a question about bursting an HTML and an XLS, so a report in HTML and Excel at the same time. And when it's done, they get 2 emails, which is obviously not what you want. You'd rather get 1 email. Gerard, I have not tried to burst in multiple formats at the same time, but we can certainly test that and get back to you on whether it can be done in 1 email. There's another question about whether there will be any more of these tips webinars in the future. Yes, we plan on hosting these webinars quarterly to share our knowledge with anyone that is interested. We have another question about whether you can set this up with multiple pages. Yes, you can. The render variables, the way that we've set them up, it can be done with as many or as few pages as you want. It works with 2 pages. That was the example we have here. You can do it with 30 pages. The main thing to note is that on the prompt, the only static choice that you have to set here on the prompt is the one that you want to set by default. So if you're not going to display the prompt, you really only need to set summary, and you can have 12 other pages in the report, and you can pass those through drill-throughs, and they don't ever have to be a choice here at the prompt. Now, if you want to schedule any reports and distribute the detail levels, not the summary level, then you do have to display the prompt so that when that report is scheduled and you set the prompt values for the schedule, you're able to select those detail pages so that that's what the output is within the schedule. Okay, does anyone else have any questions? All right, there's another question about these optional prompts, whether they have to be here or not. There is a reason that they're here right now. Now, within the report, we are using one query. And this one query has these filters on it, and even though they're optional, they have to be answered to some extent. So, at the summary level, say you don't want you don't want to provide filters, you don't want to provide prompts at the summary level. What I would recommend then is that you create two separate queries, one of which doesn't have these optional prompts. Set the summary to use this query. Let me name these so that we can see what we're looking at. So if we go back to our summary page, our query is summary, and on our detail page, our query is detail. And you're also going to need to set on the query, use for parameter info, no, at least on this detail. So what that means is when the prompt page is rendered and when the report is rendered, unless this query is called, it will not execute. So we only have the optional prompts here. There are no optional prompts set here, so we can delete them from the prompt page now, and the summary report will still run, and these won't show up. Again, if we removed these prompts and we had those optional filters on the same query that was populating the summary page, when you hit finish on the prompt page, you would get a Report Studio generated prompt page that made you specify whether you wanted to answer those optional prompts or not. So, you know, there's a little bit of juggling to make it behave exactly as you want. Let me see if there's any other questions. Okay, it looks like there are not any other questions at this time, so I am going to go ahead and wrap up the WebEx and the call. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, if anybody tries to execute any of these and needs some guidance, I'm happy to help. So send an email to cognos@johndaniel.com. Thank you very much for attending today. Have a great week.